Are you starting with...
The first one is two old men. There were once two old men who decided to go on a pilgrimage to worship God in Jerusalem. One of them was a well-to-do peasant named Ephraim Tarezich Shevelev. That's me. The other, Elisha Bodroff, was not so well off. That's her. Ephraim was a staid man, serious and firm. He neither drank nor smoked nor took snuff, and had never used bad language in his life. He had twice served as a village elder, and when he left office, his accounts were in good order. He had a large family, 2 sons and a married grandson, all living with him. He was hale, long-bearded, and erect, and it was only when he was past 60 that a little gray began to show itself in his beard. Elisha was neither rich nor poor. He had formerly gone out carpentering, but now that he was growing old, he stayed at home and kept bees. One of his sons had gone away to find work. The other was living at home. Elisha was a kindly and cheerful old man. It is true, he drank sometimes, and he took snuff, and he was fond of singing. But he was a peaceable man and lived on good terms with his family and with his neighbors. He was short and dark with a curly beard, and like his patron Saint Elisha, he was quite bald-headed. The 2 old men had taken a vow long since and had arranged to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem together, but Ephraim could never spare the time. He always had so much business on hand. As soon as one thing was finished, he started another. First, he had to arrange his grandson's marriage. Then he had to wait for his youngest son to return from the army. And after that, he began building a new hut. One holiday, the 2 old men met outside the hut and, sitting down on some timber, began to talk.
Well, when are we going to fulfill our vow?
Well, we must wait. This year has turned out a hard one for me. I started building the hut thinking it would cost me something over 100 rubles, but now it's getting to be 300, and it's still not finished. We shall have to go, well, maybe in summer. In summer, God willing, we will go without fail.
It seems to me we ought not to put it off, but should go at once. Spring is the best time.
Well, the time is right enough, but what about my building? How can I leave that?
As if you had no one to leave in charge. Your son can look after it.
But how? My oldest son is not trustworthy. He sometimes takes a glass too much.
Oh, neighbor, when we die, they'll get on without us. Let your son begin now to get some experience.
That's true enough. But somehow when one begins a thing, one likes to see it done.
Friend, we can never get through all we have to do. The other day, the women folk at home were washing and house cleaning for Easter. Here something needed doing, there something else, and they could not get everything done. So my eldest daughter-in-law, who's a sensible woman, says, we may be thankful the holiday comes without waiting for us, or however hard we work, we should never be ready for it.
I've spent a lot of money on this building, and one can't start on the journey with empty pockets. We shall want 100 rubles apiece, and it's no small sum.
Now, come, old friend. You have 10 times as much as I, and yet you talk about money. Only say when we are to start, and though I have nothing now, I shall have enough by then.
Dear me, I did not know you were so rich. Why, where will you get it from?
I can scrape some together at home. And if that's not enough, I'll sell half a score of hives to my neighbor. He's long been wanting to buy them.
If they swarm well this year, you'll regret it.
Regret it? Not I, neighbor. I never regretted anything in my life, except my sins. There's nothing more precious than the soul.
That's so. But still, it's not right to neglect things at home.
But what if our souls are neglected? That's worse. We took a vow, so let us go. Now, seriously, let's go.
Elisha succeeded in persuading his comrade. In the morning, after thinking it well over, Ephraim came to Elisha. "You are right. Let us go. Life and death are in God's hands. We must go now while we're still alive and have the strength." A week later, the old men were ready to start. Ephraim had money enough at hand. He took 100 rubles himself and left 200 with his wife. Elisha, too, got ready. He sold 10 hives to his neighbor, with any new swarms that might come from them before the summer. He took 70 rubles for the lot. The rest of the 100 rubles he scraped together from the other members of the household, fairly clearing them out. His wife gave him all she had been saving up for her funeral, and his daughter-in-law also gave him all that she had. Ephraim gave his eldest son definite orders about everything: when and how much grass to mow, where to cart the manure, and how to finish off the roof on the cottage. He thought out everything and gave his orders accordingly. Elisha, on the other hand, only explained to his wife that she was to keep separate the swarms from the hives he had sold, and to be sure to let the neighbors have them all without any tricks. As to household affairs, he did not even mention them.
You will see what to do and how to do it as the needs arise. You are the masters, and you will know how to do what's best for yourselves.
So the old men got ready. Their people baked them cakes and made bags for them and cut them linen for leg bands. They put on new leather shoes and took them with spare shoes of plaited bark. Their families went with them to the end of the village and there took leave of them, and the old men started on their pilgrimage. Elisha left home in a cheerful mood, and as soon as he was out of the village forgot all his home affairs. His only care was how to please his comrade, how to avoid saying a rude word to anyone, how to get to his destination and home again in peace and love. Walking along the road, Elisha would either whisper some prayer to himself or go over in his mind such of the lives of the saints as he was able to remember. When he came across anyone on the road or turned in anywhere for the night, he tried to behave as gently as possible and to say a godly word. So he journeyed on, rejoicing. One thing only he could not do. He could not give up taking snuff. Though he had left his snuff box behind, he hankered after it. Then a man came on the road, gave him some snuff, and every now and then he would lag behind, not to lead his comrade into temptation, and would take a pinch of snuff. Ephraim too walked well and firmly, doing no wrong and speaking no vain words, but his heart was not so light. Household cares weighed on his mind. He kept worrying about what was going on at home. Had he not forgotten to give his son this or that order? Would his son do things properly? If he happened to see potatoes being planted or manure carted as he went along, he wondered if his son was doing as he had been told, and he almost wanted to turn back and show him how to do things, or even do them himself. The old men had been walking for 5 weeks, and they had worn out their homemade bark shoes and had begun buying new ones when they reached Little Russia. From the time they left home, they had to pay for their food and for their night's lodging. But when they reached Little Russia, the people vied with one another, asking them and inviting them into their huts. They took them in and fed them and would accept no payment. And more than that, they put bread or even cakes into their bags for them to eat on the road. The old men traveled some 500 miles in this manner, free of expense. But after they had crossed the next province, they came to a district where the harvest had failed. The peasants still gave them free lodging at night, but no longer fed them for nothing. Sometimes even they could get no bread. They offered to pay for it, but there was still none to be had. The people said the harvest had completely failed the year before. Those who had been rich were ruined and had to sell all they possessed. Those of moderate means were left destitute, and those of the poor who had not left those parts, wandered about begging, or starved at home in utter want. In the winter, they had to eat husks and goosefoot. One night, the old men stopped in a small village. They bought 15 pounds of bread, slept there, and started before sunrise to get well on their way before the heat of the day. When they had gone some 8 miles, on coming to a stream, they sat down, and filling a bowl with water, they steeped some bread in it and ate it. Then they changed their leg bands and rested for a while. Elisha took out his snuff box. How is it you don't give up that nasty habit?
The evil habit is stronger than I am.
Presently they got up and went on. After walking for nearly another night, for nearly another 8 miles, they came to a large village and passed right through it. It had now grown hot. Elisha was tired out and wanted to rest and have a drink, but Ephraim did not stop. Ephraim was the better walker of the two, and Elisha found it hard to keep up with him.
Oh, if only I could have a drink.
Oh, have a drink? I don't want any.
You go on, but I'll just run into that little hut there. I'll catch you up in a moment.
All right. And he went on along the high road alone, while Elisha turned back to the hut. It was a small hut, plastered with clay, the bottom a dark color, the top whitewashed, but the clay had crumbled away. Evidently it was long since it had been replastered, and the thatch was off the roof on one side. The entrance of the hut was through the yard. Elisha entered the yard and saw, lying close to a bank of earth that ran round the hut, a gaunt, beardless man with his shirt tucked into his trousers, as is the custom in Little Russia. The man must have lain down in the shade, but the sun had come round and now shone full on him. Though not asleep, he still lay there. Elisha called to him and asked for a drink, but the man gave no answer.
Well, he's either ill or unfriendly,
thought Elisha, and going to the door, he heard a child crying in the hut. He took hold of the ring that served as a door handle and knocked on it.
Hey, masters, he called.
No answer. He knocked again with his staff.
Hey, Christians.
Nothing stirred.
Hey, servants of God.
Still no reply. Elisha was about to turn away when he thought he heard a groan on the other side of the door.
Oh, dear me. Some misfortune might have happened to the people. I'd better have a look.
And he entered the hut. The door was not fastened. He opened it and went along up the narrow passage. The door into the dwelling room was open. To the left was a brick oven. In front against the wall was an icon stand and a table before it. By the table was a bench on which sat an old woman, bareheaded and wearing only a single garment. There she sat with her head resting on the table, and near her was a thin, wax-colored boy with a protruding stomach. He was asking for something, pulling at her sleeve and crying bitterly. Elisha entered. The air in the hut was very foul. He looked round and saw a woman lying on the floor behind the oven. She lay flat on the ground with her eyes closed and her throat rattling, now stretching out a leg, now dragging it in, tossing from side to side, and the foul smell came from her. Evidently she could do nothing for herself, and no one had been attending to her needs. The old woman lifted her head and saw the stranger.
What do you want? What do you want, man? We have nothing.
Elisha understood her, though she spoke in the Little Russian dialect.
I came in for a drink of water, servant of God. There's no one. We have nothing to fetch it in. Go your way. Is there no one among you then well enough to attend to that woman? No one. My son is dying outside, and we are dying in here.
The little boy had ceased crying, when he saw the stranger. But when the old woman began to speak, he began again, and clutching hold of her sleeve, cried, "Bread, Granny, bread!" Elisha was about to question the old woman when the man staggered into the hut. He came along the passage, clinging to the wall, but as he was entering the dwelling room, he fell in the corner near the threshold, and without trying to get up again to reach the bench, he began to speak in broken words. He brought out a word at a time, stopping to draw breath and gasping. Illness has seized us, and famine. He is dying of hunger." And he motioned toward the boy and began to sob. Elisha jerked up the sack behind his shoulder and, pulling the straps off his arms, put it on the floor. Then he lifted it onto the bench and untied the strings. Having opened the sack, he took out a loaf of bread and, cutting off a piece with his knife, handed it to the man. The man would not take it, but pointed to the little boy and to the little girl crouching behind the oven as if to say, "Give it to them." Elisha held it out to the boy. When the boy smelt the bread, he stretched out his arms, and seizing the slice with both of his little hands, bit into it so that his nose disappeared into the chunk. The little girl came out from behind the oven and fixed her eyes on the bread. Elisha gave her also a slice. Then he cut off another piece and gave it to the old woman, and she too began munching on it.
If only some water could be brought. Their mouths are parched. I tried to find some water yesterday. Was it today? I can't remember, but I fell down and could go no further. And the pail has remained there, unless someone has taken it.
Elisha asked where the well was. The old woman told him. Elisha went out, found the pail, brought some water, and gave the people a drink. The children and the old woman and some more bread with the water. But the man would not eat. "I cannot eat," he said. All this time the younger woman did not show any consciousness, but continued to toss from side to side. Presently Elisha went to the village shop and bought some millet, salt, flour, and oil. He found an axe, chopped some wood, and made a fire. The little girl came and helped him. Then he boiled some soup and gave the starving people a meal. The man ate a little. The old woman had some too, and the little girl and the boy licked the bowl clean and then curled up and fell asleep in one another's arms. The man sat at the table, and the old woman, they began telling Elisha how they had sunk to their present state.
We were poor enough before, but when the crops failed, what we gathered hardly lasted us through the autumn. We had nothing left the time winter came, and had to beg from the neighbors and from anyone we could. At first they gave, and then they began to refuse. Some would have been glad enough to help us, but had nothing to give, and we were ashamed of asking. We were in debt all round, and owed money and flour and bread.
I went to look for work, but could find none. Everywhere people were offering to work merely for their own keep. One day you'd get a short job, and then you might spend 2 days looking for work. Then, the old woman and the girl went begging further away, but they got very little bread. It was so scarce. Still, we scraped food together somehow and hoped to struggle through till the next harvest. But towards spring, people ceased to give anything. And then this illness seized us. Things became worse and worse. One day they might have something to eat, and then nothing for 2 days. We began eating grass. Whether it was the grass or what made my wife sick, I don't know. She could not keep on her legs, and I had no strength left, and there was nothing to help us to recovery.
I struggled on alone for a while, but at last I broke down too for want of food and grew weak. The girl also grew weak and timid. I told her to go to the neighbors, but she would not leave the hut, but crept into a corner and sat there. The day before yesterday, a neighbor looked in, but seeing that we were ill and hungry, she turned away and left us. Her husband had to go away, and she has nothing for her own little ones to eat. And so we lay, waiting for death.
Having heard their story, Elisha gave up the thought of overtaking his comrade that day and remained with them all night. In the morning he got up and began doing the housework, just as if it were his own home. He kneaded bread with the old woman's help and lit the fire. Then he went with the little girl to the neighbors to get the most necessary things, and there was nothing in the hut. Everything had been sold for bread, cooking utensils, clothing, and all. So Elisha began replacing what was necessary, making some things himself and buying some. He remained there one day, then another, and then a third. The little boy picked up strength, and whenever Elisha sat down, crept along the bench and nestled up to him. The little girl brightened up and helped in all the work, running after Elisha and calling, "Daddy, Daddy." The old woman grew stronger and managed to go out to see the neighbor. The man, too, improved and was able to get up and about, holding on to the wall. Only the wife could not get up, but even she regained consciousness on the third day and asked for food.
Well, I never expected to waste so much time on the way. Now I must be getting on.
The fourth day was the feast, the day after summer fast, and Elisha thought,
I will stay and break the fast with these people. I'll go and buy them something and keep the feast with them. Tomorrow evening I'll start.
So Elisha went into the village, bought milk, wheat flour, and drippings, and helped the old woman to boil and bake for the morrow. On the feast day, Elisha went to church, and then broke the fast with his friends at the hut. That day, the wife got up and managed to move about a bit. The husband had shaved and put on a clean shirt, which the old woman had washed for him, and he went to beg for mercy of a rich peasant in the village to whom his ploughland and meadow had been mortgaged. He went to beg the rich peasant to grant him the use of the meadow and field till after the harvest. But in the evening he came back very sad and began to weep. The rich peasant had shown no mercy, but had said, "Bring me the money." Elisha again grew thoughtful.
How are they to live now? Other people will go haymaking, but there will be nothing for these to mow. Their grassland is mortgaged. The rye will ripen, others will reap, and what a fine crop Mother Earth is giving this year. But they have nothing to look forward to. Their 3 acres are pledged to the rich peasant, and when I am gone, they'll drift back into the state I found them in.
Elisha was in two minds, but finally decided not to leave that evening, but to wait until the morrow. He went out into the yard to sleep. He said his prayers and lay down, but he could not sleep. On the one hand, he felt he ought to be going, for he had spent too much time and money as it was. On the other hand, he felt sorry for the people.
There seems to be no end to it. First, I only meant to bring them a little water and give them each a slice of bread. And just see where it's landed me. It's a case of redeeming the meadow and the cornfield. And when I've done that, I shall have to buy a cow for them and a horse for the man to cart his sheaves. Oh, nice coil you've got yourself into, Brother Elisha. You've slipped your cables and lost your reckoning.
Elisha got up, lifted his coat, which he had been using for a pillow, unfolded it, got out his snuff box, and took a pinch, thinking that it might perhaps clear his thoughts. But no. He thought and came to no conclusion. He ought to be going, and yet pity held him back. He did not know what to do. He refolded his coat and put it under his head again. He lay thus for a long time, till the cocks had already crowed once. Then he was quite drowsy, and suddenly It seemed as if someone had roused him. He saw that he was dressed for the journey, with the sack on his back and the staff in his hand, and at the gate it stood ajar, so that he could just squeeze through. He was about to pass through it when the sack caught against the fence on one side. He tried to free it, but then his leg band caught on the other side and came undone. He pulled at the sack. He saw that it had not caught on a fence, but that the little girl was holding it and crying, "Bread, Daddy, bread." He looked at his foot, and there was the tiny boy holding him by the leg band, while the master of the hut and the old woman were looking at him through the window. Elisha awoke and said to himself in an audible voice,
"Tomorrow I will redeem their cornfield, and I will buy them a horse, and flour till last to the harvest, and a cow for the little ones. Or else why I go seek the Lord beyond the sea, I may lose him in myself."
Then Elisha fell asleep and slept till morning. He awoke early, and going to the rich peasant, redeemed both the cornfield and the meadowland. He bought a scythe, for that also had been sold, and brought it back with him. Then he sent the man to mow, and himself went into the village. He heard that there was a horse and cart for sale at the public house, and he struck a bargain with the owner and bought them. Then he brought a sack of flour, put it in the cart, and went to see about a cow. As he was going along, he overtook two women. He overtook two women talking as they went. Though they spake the little Russian dialect, he understood everything they were saying.
At first it seems they did not know him. They thought he was just an ordinary man. And he came in to ask for a drink of water, and then he remained. Just think of the things he's bought for them. Why, they say he bought a horse and a cart for them at the publicans only this morning. There's not many such men in the world. It's worthwhile going to have a look at him.
Elisha heard and understood that he was being praised, and he did not go to buy the cow, but returned to the inn, paid for the horse, harnessed it, drove up to the hut, and got out. The people in the hut were astonished when they saw the horse. They thought it might be for them, but dared not ask. The man came out to open the gate. "Where did you get a horse from, grandfather?"
Why, I bought it. It was going cheap. Go cut some grass and put it in the manger for it to eat during the night, and take in the sack.
The man unharnessed the horse and carried the sack into the barn. Then he mowed some grass and put it in the manger. Everybody laid down to sleep. Elisha went outside and lay by the roadside. That evening he took his bag out with him. When everyone was asleep, he got up, packed, and fastened his bag, wrapped the linen bands round his legs, put on his shoes and coat, and set off to follow Ephraim. When Elisha had walked more than 3 miles, it began to grow light. He sat down under a tree, opened his bag, counted his money, and found he had only 17 rubles and 20 kopecks left.
Well, it's no use trying to cross the sea with this. If I beg my way, it may be worse than not going at all. Friend Ephraim will have to get to Jerusalem without me, and he will place a candle at the shrines in my name. As for me, I'm afraid I shall never fulfill my vow in this life. I must be thankful it was made to a merciful master and to one who pardons sinners.
Elisha rose, jerked his bag well up on his shoulders, and turned back. Not wishing to be recognized by anyone, he made a circuit to avoid the village and walked briskly homeward. Coming from home, the way had seemed difficult. It seemed difficult to him. and he had found it hard to keep up with Ephraim. But now, on his return journey, God helped him to get over the ground so that he hardly felt fatigue. Walking seemed like child's play. He went along swinging his staff and did his 40, 50 miles a day. When Elisha reached home, the harvest was over. His family were delighted to see him again, and all wanted to know what had happened, why and how he had been left behind, and why had he returned without reaching Jerusalem. But Elisha did not tell him.
It was not God's will that I should get there. I lost my money on the way and lagged behind my companion. Forgive me, for the Lord's sake.
Elisha gave his old wife what money he had left. Then he questioned them about home affairs. Everything was going on well. All the work had been done, nothing neglected, and all were living in peace and concord. Ephraim's family heard of his return the same day and came for news of their old man. And to them, Elisha gave the same answers.
Well, Ephraim is a fast walker. We parted 3 days before St. Peter's Day. I meant to catch up with him again, but all sorts of things happened. I lost my money and had no means to get any further, so I turned back.
The folks were astonished that so sensible a man should have acted so foolishly, should have started and not got to his destination, and should have squandered all his money. They wondered at it for a while, then they forgot all about it. And Elisha forgot about it too. He set to work again on his homestead with his son's help, and he cut wood for fuel for the winter. He and the women threshed the corn. Then he mended the thatch on the outhouses, put the bees under cover, and handed over to his neighbor the 10 hives he had sold them during the spring, and all the swarms that had come from them. His wife tried not to tell how many swarms there had been from those hives, but Elisha knew well enough from which there had been swarms and from which not. And instead of 10, he handed over 17 swarms to his neighbor. 17. Having got everything ready for the winter, Elisha sent his son away to find work, while he himself took to plaiting shoes with bark and hollowing out logs for hives. All that day, while Elisha stopped behind the hut with the sick people, Ephraim waited for him. He only went on a little way before he sat down. He waited and waited, had a nap, woke up again, and again sat waiting, but his comrade did not come. He gazed till his eyes ached. The sun was already sinking behind the tree, and still no Elisha was to be seen. Well, perhaps he's passed me, or perhaps someone gave him a lift and drove by while I slept, and he did not see me. But how could he help seeing me? One can see so far here in the steep. Shall I go back? Suppose he's out in front, and then we'll miss each other completely, and it will still get worse. I'd better go on, and shall be sure to meet him where we put up for the night. He came to a village and told the watchman if an old man of a certain description came along to bring him to the hut where Ephraim stopped. But Elisha did not turn up that night. Ephraim went on, asking all he met whether they had not seen a little bald-headed old man. No one had seen such a traveler. Ephraim wondered, but went on alone, saying, "We shall be sure to meet in Odessa on board the ship." And he did not trouble about it any more. On the way he came across a pilgrim wearing a priest's coat with long hair and a skull cap such as priests wear. The pilgrim had been to Mount Athos and was now going to Jerusalem for the second time. They both stopped at the same place, and having met, they traveled on together. They got safely to Odessa, and there had to wait 3 days for a ship. Many pilgrims from many nations were in the same case. Again, Ephraim asked about Elisha, but no one had seen him. Ephraim got himself a foreign passport, which cost him 5 rubles. He paid 40 rubles for a return ticket to Jerusalem and bought a supply of bread and herrings for the voyage. The pilgrim began explaining to Ephraim how he might get on the ship without paying his fare. But Ephraim would not listen. "No, I came prepared to pay, and I shall pay." The ship was freighted, and the pilgrims went on board, Ephraim and his new comrade among them. The anchors were weighed, and the ship put out to sea. All day they sailed smoothly, but toward night a wind arose. Rain came on, and the vessel tossed about and shipped water. The people were frightened. The women wailed and screamed, and some of the weaker men ran about the ship looking for shelter. Ephraim too was frightened, but he would not show it, and remained at the place on deck where he had settled down when first he came on board, beside some old men from Tambov. There they sat silent all night and all next day, holding on to their sacks. On the 3rd day it grew calm, and on the 5th day they anchored in Constantinople. Some of the pilgrims went on shore to visit the church at St. Sophia, now held by the Turks. Ephraim remained on ship and only bought some white bread. They lay there for 24 hours and then put out to sea again. At Smyrna they stopped again, and at Alexandria. But at last they arrived safely in Jaffa, where all the pilgrims had to disembark. From there still it was more than 40 miles by road to Jerusalem. When disembarking, the people were again much frightened. The ship was high, and the people were dropped into boats, which rocked so much that it was easy to miss them and fall into the water. A couple of men did get a wetting, but at the last all was safely landed. They went on foot, and at noon on the 3rd day reached Jerusalem. They stopped outside the town at the Russian inn where their passports were endorsed. Then, after dinner, they went to the cell of Mary of Egypt, where she had lived doing penance. Here, too, they placed candles and had prayers read for them. And then they went to Abraham's monastery and saw the place where Abraham intended to slay his son as an offering to God. Then they visited the spot where Christ appeared to Mary Magdalene and the church of St. James, the Lord's brother. Toward evening, they got up and they went to midnight mass at the Church of the Resurrection where the Lord's sepulchre is. And then they came to the church. A great many pilgrims were there, some Russians and some of other nationalities, Greeks and Armenians, Turks and Syrians. Ephraim entered the holy gates with the crowd. A monk led them past the Turkish sentinels to the place where the Savior was taken down from the cross and anointed, and where candles were burning in 9 great candlesticks. The monk showed and explained everything. Ephraim offered a candle there. Then the monk led Ephraim to the right, up the steps to Golgotha, to the place where the cross had stood. Ephraim prayed there. Then they showed him the cleft where the ground had been rent asunder to its nethermost depths, the place where Christ's hands and feet were nailed to the cross. Then Adam's tomb where the blood of the... You get the picture. Gazing into the little chapel in which was the Holy Sepulchre itself, with 36 lamps burning above it. As he stood there looking over the people's heads, he saw something that surprised him. Just beneath the lamps in which the sacred fire burns, and in front of everyone, Ephraim saw an old man in a gray coat whose bald head, his bald shining head, was just like Elisha Bodrov's. It is like him. But it cannot be Elisha. He could not have got ahead of me. The ship before ours started a week sooner. He could not have caught that. And he was not on ours, for I saw every pilgrim on board. Hardly had Ephraim thought this when the little old man began to pray and bowed 3 times, once forward to God, then once on each side to the brethren. And as he turned his head to the right, Ephraim recognized him. Elisha himself, with his dark curly beard turning gray at the cheeks, with his brows, his eyes and nose, and his expression on his face. Yes, it was he. Ephraim was very pleased to have found his comrade again and wondered how Elisha had got ahead of him. Well done, Elisha. See how he has pushed ahead. He must have come across someone who showed him the way. When we get out, I'll have to find him and get rid of this fellow in the skull cap and keep to Elisha. Perhaps he will show me how he got to the front also. Ephraim kept looking out so as not to lose sight of Elisha. But when the mass was over, the crowd began to sway, pushing forward to kiss the tomb, and pushed Ephraim. He began elbowing through the crowd, anxious only to get out. When he reached the open, he went out for a long time searching for Elisha, both outside and in the church itself. In the cells of the church, he saw many people of all kinds eating and drinking wine and reading and sleeping there, but Elisha was nowhere to be seen. So Ephraim returned to the inn without having found his comrade. The next day, Ephraim went to the Holy Sepulchre again with an old man from Tamboth, whom he had met on ship. He tried to get to the front, but was again pressed back, so he stood by a pillar and prayed. He looked before him, and there in the foremost place, under the lamps, close to the very sepulchre of the Lord, stood Elisha, with his arms spread out like a priest at the altar, and with his bald head shining. Well now, I won't lose him. He pushed forward to the front, but when he got there, there was no Elisha. He had evidently got away. Again, on the third day, Ephraim looked and saw at the sepulchre in the holiest place Elisha standing to the sight of all men, his arms outspread, and his eyes gazing upwards as he saw something above, and his bald head was all shining. Well, this time he shall not escape me. I will go and stand at the door. Then we can't miss one another. Ephraim went out and stood by the door till past noon. Everyone had passed out, but still Elisha did not appear. Ephraim remained 6 weeks in Jerusalem and went everywhere, to Bethlehem and to Bethany and to Jordan. He had a new shirt sealed at the Holy Sepulchre for his burial. And he took a bottle of water from the Jordan and some holy earth, and bought candles that had been lit at the sacred flame. In 8 places he inscribed names to be prayed for, and he spent all his money except just enough to get home with. Then he started homeward. He walked to Jaffa, sailed thence to Odessa, and walked home from there on foot. Ephraim traveled the same road he had come by, and as he drew nearer home, his former anxiety returned as to how affairs were getting on in his absence. Much water flows in a year, the proverb says. Takes a lifetime to build up a homestead, but not long to ruin it, he thought. And he wondered how his son had managed without him, what sort of spring they were having, how the cattle had wintered, and whether the cottage was well finished. When Ephraim came to the district where he had parted with Elisha the summer before, he could hardly believe that the people living there were the same. The year before they had been starving, but now they were living in comfort. The harvest had been good, and the people had recovered and forgotten their former misery. One evening Ephraim reached the very place where Elisha had remained behind, and as he entered the village, a little girl with a white smock ran out to him and cried, "Daddy, Daddy, come to our house." Ephraim meant to pass on, but the little girl would not let him. She took hold of his coat, laughing, and pulled him toward the hut, where a woman with a small boy came out to the porch and beckoned to him.
"Come in, grandfather. Have supper and spend the night with us."
So Ephraim went in. I may as well ask about Elisha. I fancy this is the very hut he went for a drink of water. The woman helped him off with his bag and carried his coat and gave him water to wash his face. Then she made him sit down to table and set milk, curd cakes, and porridge before him. Ephraim thanked her and praised her for her kindness to a pilgrim. The woman shook her head.
We have good reason to welcome pilgrims. It was a pilgrim who showed us what life is. We were living forgetful of God, and God punished us almost to death. We reached such a pass last summer that we all lay ill and helpless with nothing to eat. And we should have died, but that God sent us an old man to help us, just such a one as you. He came in one day to ask for a drink of water, saw the state we were in, took pity on us, and remained with us. He gave us food and drink and set us on our feet again. And he redeemed our land and bought a cart and a horse and gave them to us.
Oh, here the little girl joined in. No, Granny, she said. First, he put it down here in the middle of the hut, and then he lifted it to the bench. And they began discussing and recalling all he had said and done, where he had sat and slept, and what he had said to each of them. At night, the peasant himself came home on his horse, and he too began to tell about Elisha and how he had lived with them. After giving Ephraim food and drink, they showed him where he was to sleep and lay down to sleep themselves. But though Ephraim lay down, he could not sleep. He could not get Elisha out of his mind, but remembered how he had seen him 3 times in Jerusalem standing in the foremost place. So that's how he got ahead of me. God may or may not have accepted my pilgrimage, but he certainly accepted his. Next morning, Ephraim bade farewell to the people, who put some paddies in his sack before they went to their work, and he continued on his journey. Ephraim had been away just a year, and it was spring again when he reached home one evening. His son was not at home, but had gone to the public house. And when he came back, he had had a drop too much. Ephraim began questioning him. Everything showed that the young fellow had been unsteady during his father's absence. The money had all been wrongly spent, and the work had been neglected. The father began to upbraid his son, and the son answered rudely. Why didn't you stay and look after yourself? He said. You go off taking the money with you, and now you demand it of me? The old man grew angry and struck his son. In the morning, Ephraim went to the village elder to complain of his son's conduct. As he was passing Elisha's house, his friend's wife greeted him from the porch.
How'd you do, neighbor? How'd you do, dear friend? Did you get to Jerusalem safely?
Well, yes, thank God. I have been there. I lost sight of your old man, but I hear he got home safely.
Yes, neighbor, he has come back. He's been back a long time. Soon after Assumption, I think it was, he returned. And we were glad the Lord had sent him back to us. We were dull without him. We can't expect much work from him anymore. His years of work are past. But he's still the head of the household, and he's much more cheerful when he's at home. And how glad our lad was. He said it's like being without sunlight when father's away. It was dull without him, dear friend. We're fond of him and take good care of him.
Is he at home now?
Oh, yes, he is, dear friend. He's with his bees. He is hiving the swarms. He said they're swarming well this year. The Lord has given much strength to the bees that my husband doesn't remember the like. The Lord is not rewarding us according to our sins, he says. Come in, dear neighbor. He'll be so glad to see you again.
Ephraim passed through the passage into the yard and to the apiary to see Elisha. There was Elisha in his gray coat, without any face net or gloves, standing under the birch trees, looking upwards, his arms stretched out and his bald head shining, as Ephraim had seen him at the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And above him The sunlight shone through the birches as the flames of fire had done in the holy place, and the golden bees flew round his head like a halo and did not sting him.
Here's your friend come.
Elisha looked round with a pleased face and came toward Ephraim, gently picking bees out of his beard.
Good day, neighbor. Good day, dear friend. Did you get there safely?
My feet walked there, and I have brought you some water from the river Jordan. You must come by my house for it. But whether the Lord accepted my efforts...
Well, the Lord be thanked. May Christ bless you.
My feet have been there, but whether my soul or another's has been there.
That's God's...
More truly.
That's God's business, neighbor. God's business.
On my return journey, I stopped at the hut where you remained behind.
Oh, that's God's business, neighbor. God's business. Come into the cottage. I'll give you some honey.
And Elisha changed the conversation and talked of home affairs. Ephraim sighed and did not speak to Elisha of the people in the hut, nor of how he had seen him in Jerusalem. But he now understood that the best way to keep one's vows to God and to do his will is for each man, while he lives, to show love and do good to others. Kind of feel like you've been on a pilgrimage, don't you? 500 miles and then the boat ride and back. The three hermits. A bishop was sailing from Archangel to the Solovsk monastery, and on the same vessel were a number of pilgrims on their way to visit the shrines at that place. The voyage was a smooth one, the winds favorable and the weather fair. The pilgrims lay on deck, eating or sat in groups, talking to one another. The bishop, too, came on deck, and as he was pacing up and down, he noticed a group of men standing near the prow and listening to a fisherman who was pointing to the sea and telling them something. The bishop stopped and looked in the direction to which the man was pointing. He could see nothing, however, but the sea glistening in the sunshine. He drew nearer to listen, but when the man saw him, he took off his cap and was silent. The rest of the people also took their caps off and bowed. "Do not let me disturb you, friends," said the bishop. "I came here to hear what this good man was saying." "Well, the fisherman was telling us about the hermits," replied one, a tradesman rather bolder than the rest. "What hermits?" asked the bishop, going to the side of the vessel and seating himself on a box. "Tell me about them. I should like to hear. What were you pointing at?" "Why, that little island you can see just over there," answered the man, pointing to a spot ahead and a little to the right. "That is the island where the hermits live for the salvation of their souls." "Where is this island?" "I see nothing." "There, in the distance, if you will please look along my hand. Do you see that little cloud? Below that and a little bit to the left, there's just a faint streak. That is the island." The bishop looked carefully, but his unaccustomed eyes could make out nothing but the water shimmering in the sun. "I cannot see it," he said. "But who are the hermits who live there?" "They are holy men," answered the fisherman. "I had long heard tell of them, but never chanced to see them myself till the year before last." And the fisherman related how once when he was out fishing, he had been stranded at night upon the island, not knowing where he was. In the morning he had wandered about the island. He came across an earth hut and met an old man standing near it. Presently 2 others came out, and after having fed him and dried his things, they helped him mend his boat. "And what are they like?" asked the bishop. "Well, one is a small man, and his back is bent. He wears a priest's cassock and is very old. He must be more than 100, I should say. Well, he is so old that the white on his beard is taking a greenish tinge. But he's always smiling, and his face is as bright as an angel's from heaven. The second is taller, but he's also very old. He wears tattered peasant coat. His beard is broad and of a yellowish gray color. He is a strong man. Before I had time to help him, he turned my boat over as if it were only a pail. He, too, is kindly and cheerful. The third is tall and has a beard as white as snow and reaching to his knees. He is stern, with an overhanging eyebrows, and he wears nothing but a mat tied round his waist." "Oh. And did they speak to you?" asked the bishop. "Well, for the most part, they did everything in silence and spoke but little, even to one another. One of them would just give a glance, and the others would understand him. I asked the tallest whether they had lived there long. He frowned and muttered something as if he were angry. But the oldest one took his hand and smiled, and then the tall one was quiet. The oldest one only said, 'Have mercy on us,' and he smiled." While the fisherman was talking, the ship had drawn nearer the island. "There, now you can see it plainly. If you're graceful, please look," said the tradesman, pointing with his hand. The bishop looked, and now he really saw a dark streak, which was the island. Having looked at it a while, he left the prow of the vessel and, going to the stern, asked the helmsman, "What island is that?" "That one," replied the man, "has no name. There are many such in the sea. It's true that there are... Is it true that there are hermits who live there for the salvation of their soul?" "So it is said, your grace, but I don't know if it's true. Fishermen, they say, have seen them, but of course they may only be spinning yarns." "I should like to land on that island and see those men," said the bishop. "How could I manage it?" "Oh, the ship cannot get close to the island," replied the helmsman, "but you might be rowed there in a boat. You'd better speak to the captain." The captain was sent for, and he came. "I should like to see these hermits," said the bishop. "Could I not be rowed ashore?" The captain tried to dissuade him. "Of course it could be done," said he, "but we should lose much time. And I might venture to say to your grace, the old men are not worth your pains. I have heard say that they are foolish old fellows who understand nothing and never speak a word, any more than the fish in the sea. I wish to see them," said the bishop, "and I will pay you for your trouble and loss of time. Please, let me have a boat." Well, there was no help for it. The order was given. The sailors trimmed the sails, the steersman put to the helm, and the ship's course was set for the island. A chair was placed at the prow for the bishop, and he sat there, looking ahead. The passengers all collected on the prow and gazed at the island. Those who had sharpest eyes could presently make out on the rocks, and then a mud hut was seen. At last one man saw the hermits themselves. The captain brought a telescope, and after looking through it, handed it to the bishop. "Well, it's right enough. There are 3 men standing on the shore. There, a little to the right of the big rock." The bishop took the telescope, got it into position, and he saw the 3 men. A tall one, a shorter one, and one very small and bent, standing on the shore and holding each other by the hand. The captain turned to the bishop. "The vessel can get no nearer than this, your grace. If you wish to go ashore, we must ask you to go in a boat while we anchor here." The cable was quickly let out, the anchor cast, and the sails furled. There was a jerk, and the vessel shook. Then a boat, having been lowered, the oarsmen jumped in, and the bishop descended the ladder and took his seat. The men pulled at their oars, and the boat moved rapidly toward the island. When they pulled on their oars, when they came within a stone's throw, they saw 3 old men, a tall one with only a mat tied round his waist, a shorter one in a tattered peasant coat, and a very old one, bent with age and wearing an old cassock, all 3 standing hand in hand. The oarsmen pulled into the shore and held on with the boat lock while the bishop got out. The old men bowed to him and gave them his he gave them his benediction, at which they bowed still lower. Then the bishop began to speak with them. "I have heard," he said, "that you are godly men, that you live here, saving your own souls and praying to our Lord Christ for your fellow man. I am an unworthy servant of Christ, and I am called by God's mercy to keep and teach his flock. I wish to see you, servants of God, and to do what I can do to teach you also." The old men looked at each other. They looked at each other, but they remained silent. "Tell me," said the bishop, what are you doing to save your souls, and how do you serve God on this island?" The second hermit sighed and looked at the oldest, the very ancient one. The latter smiled and said,
"We do not know how to serve God. We only serve and support ourselves, servant of God."
"But how do you pray to God?"
"We pray this way. 3 are ye, 3 are we. Have mercy upon us."
And when the man said this, all 3 raised their eyes to heaven and repeated,
3 are ye, 3 are we. Have mercy upon us."
The bishop smiled. "You have evidently heard something about the Holy Trinity," said the bishop, "but you do not pray aright. You have won my affection, godly men. I see you wish to please the Lord, but you do not know how to serve him. That is not the way to pray. But listen to me, and I will teach you. I will teach you, not a way of my own, but the way in which God in his holy scriptures has commanded all men to pray to him." And the bishop began explaining to the hermits how God had revealed himself to men, telling them of God the Father and God the Son and God the Holy Ghost. God the Son came down to earth to save men, and this is how he taught us all to pray. Listen and repeat after me. "Our Father," and the first old man repeated after him.
"Our Father."
And the second one said,
"Our Father."
And the third one said,
"Our Father."
The first term, which art in heaven.
"Which are in heaven,"
said the first hermit, but the second one blundered over the words, and the tall hermit could not say them properly. His hair had grown over his mouth, so that he could not speak plainly. The very old hermit, having no teeth, he mumbled indistinctly. The bishop repeated the words again, and the old man repeated them after them. The bishop sat down on a stone, and the old men stood before him, watching his mouth and repeating the words as he uttered them. And all day long the bishop labored, saying a word 20, 30, 100 times over, and the old men repeated it after him. They blundered, and he corrected them and made them begin again. The bishop did not leave off till he had taught them the whole of the Lord's Prayer, so that they could not only repeat it after him, but could say it all by themselves. The middle one was the first to know it, and to repeat the whole of it alone. The bishop made him say it again and again, and at last the others could say it too. It was getting dark, and the moon was appearing over the water before the bishop rose to return to the vessel. When he took leave of the old men, they all bowed down to the ground before him. He raised them and kissed each of them, telling them to pray as he had taught them. Then he got into the boat and returned to the ship. And as he sat in the boat and was rowed to the ship, he could hear the three voices of the hermits loudly repeating the Lord's Prayer. As the boat drew near the vessel, their voices could no longer be heard, but they could still be seen in the moonlight, standing as he had left them on the shore, the shortest in the middle, the tallest on the right, and the middle one on the left. And as soon as the bishop had reached the vessel and got on board, the anchor was weighed and the sails were unfurled. The wind filled them and the ship sailed away, and the bishop took a seat in the stern and watched the island that they had left behind. For a time he could still see the hermits, but presently they disappeared from sight, though the island was still visible. At last it too vanished, and only the sea was there to be seen rippling in the moonlight. The pilgrims lay down to sleep, and all was quiet on deck. The bishop did not wish to sleep, but sat alone at the stern, gazing at the sea where the island was no longer visible, and thinking of the good old men. He thought how pleased they had been to learn the Lord's Prayer, and he thanked God for having sent him to teach and help such godly men. So the bishop sat thinking and gazing at the sea while the island had disappeared, and the moonlight flickered before his eyes, sparkling now here and now there upon the waves. Suddenly he saw something white and shining on the bright path which the moon cast across the sea. Was it a seagull? Or the little gleaming sail of some small boat? The bishop fixed his eyes on it, wondering. It must be a boat sailing after us, thought he, but it is overtaking us very rapidly. It was far, far away a minute ago, but now it is much closer. It cannot be a boat, for I can see no sail. But whatever it may be, it is following us and catching us up. And he could not make out what it was. Not a boat, not a bird, not a fish. It was too large for a man, and besides, a man could not be out there in the midst of the sea. The bishop rose and said to the helmsman, "Look there." "What is that, my friend? What is it?" the bishop repeated, though he could now see plainly what it was. The three hermits running upon the water, all gleaming white, with grey beards shining, and approaching the ship as quickly as though it were not moving. The steersman looked and let go the helm in terror. "Oh, Lord, the hermits are running after us on the water as though it were dry land." The passengers, hearing him, jumped up and crowded to the stern. They saw the hermits coming along hand in hand, and the two outer ones beckoning the ship to stop. All three were gliding along upon the water without moving their feet. Before the ship could be stopped, the hermits had reached it, and raising their hands, all three at one with one voice began to say,
"We have forgotten your teaching, servant of God. As long as we kept repeating it, we remembered. But when we stopped saying it for a time, a word dropped out, and now it's gone all to pieces. We can remember nothing of it. Teach us again."
The bishop crossed himself and, leaning over the ship's side, said, "Your own prayer will reach the Lord, men of God. It is not for me to teach you. Pray for us sinners. And the bishop bowed low before the old men. And they turned and went back across the sea, and the light shone until daybreak on the spot where they were lost to sight. And that's a true story. That was fun. Thank you all.
When I was teaching, I'd always ask the students after something was done, you have three choices. You can ask questions, give comments, and make compliments. Where do you want to start?
Nothing about money in there?
Nothing about money. This is old Archbishop, I guess that will be of interest. Yes?
Just a quick comment. I found this totally engaging. I mean, that was, Tolstoy, he tackled some very serious ideas, and one thinks about his critique of European nations and all that. And this had a realism and gave us a whole different side of his
Spirit.
what he had to say, and it was so engaging. I've never experienced such an engaging experience of a reading, so thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Yes.
So the theme is opening doors, and so you think what Tolstoy's doing, he's opening our hearts, since he believes in the law of love. Is that what he's doing? He's trying to open up our hearts to the law of love?
I think so, wouldn't you? Yes, I think that is definitely what he's doing. Two old men, you can see how Elisha, even as a affectionate and goodly and godly man, hesitated between reaching reaching Jerusalem and giving to the people, because that was going to be it, but he did, and he went through the door, right? I like the door in that story, because it was, you can't, there are people dying all around in famine, and certainly one person can't help to solve serve all. But here, when you have the choice, and it's within your heart and mind and soul to do it, he offered himself, and I love the way that Tolstoy then does the open heart symbol. This is, I do qigong too, and this is one of the things we do every week at the park. It's the open your heart gesture, and my teacher always says, okay, you need to smile, and no matter what's going on, you do smile. Millions of people do that all over the world that are into that particular practice. So just the smiling and the generosity, yes. And in the other story, there's an interesting background to that too, because in that region of Russia, there's a practice that was recorded by a pilgrim. It's called the Way of the Pilgrim, and I got it first up at the Vedanta bookstore many years ago, and it records the way you're to say the prayer of the heart. And many pilgrims walked along, or went in when they went into their hermitages, they would repeat this prayer of the heart, which is, Lord have mercy, Son of God, Lord have mercy on us. And that was a way of stilling the mind from all its busyness, and centering your life in your heart, your thoughts and your purpose. Is that clear? And so I think Tolstoy, many pilgrims passed along the road close to his estate in Yasna Polyana, and they I think one of the many pilgrims, he talked to many of them too. So a lot of the background in of the story came from his, he wrote it into the story. I think you were thinking about that too. Yeah, so good writer. Any comments? Anyone else? Yes? Okay.
Well, just to continue with that, in the first story, it was amazing to me how he stopped, and very soon after, he just became unconditional. A lot of time he didn't worry about whether he was going to live or die or his family or get to Jerusalem or anything. He just became so totally unconditional. And that's really a wonderful heart quality. I think we see some individuals doing it with some of the suffering in the world today, that same kind of unconditionality.
That's so true, yeah.
Where you really don't care almost about your own survival as much as you do to serve others. That's
Oh, thank you.
So true. Can I just say, to actually do all of the things that he did, to be so totally engaged with helping people and all of the practical and necessary things that were happening around him, here, it's wonderful when we actually get engaged on that level, but we also write checks and give that way, which is, it bypasses all of that, the actual footwork and engagement. And the thing that the story drives home is what that does for the soul of the person who's doing it, how it enlivens his life, his appreciation of life, and his loved ones, and his immediate family, because no one neglected his family. The family it's interesting, a pilgrimage. That concept of a pilgrimage, I don't know if any of us here have ever taken one. I certainly haven't. I couldn't keep up with my wife. I definitely relate to that. She's always at least 50 yards ahead of me, and she's such a little sprightly thing. But even without a pilgrimage to go through that ritual, that's why it's wonderful that in the literature here we can all go on that pilgrimage and just understand that lesson, hard learned. But the hardship of it was never on his side. Ever.
Never.
And that's hard to do what he was doing. Took a lot of, my God. And to give his money away and spend it without a thought, and to be accepted by his family, even reluctantly. He doesn't make them saints, does he? He doesn't. And he has that, both of the characters, even though they have their little flaws, one has far fewer than the other, they have humility, and they're just human, and we don't really want to hear about the saints more than, don't bring them up again, we're just doing the best we can.
That's the point, yeah. That's what's so good. Go ahead. Let's see. Go ahead.
The second story, I just loved the different ways that he approached humility, because there's an Indian story that's very much like that I've read before, about a young boy who goes to a teacher and the teacher rejects him, and so he sets up a mud image of that teacher, and he concentrates on the qualities, and without even realizing it, as he ages, he becomes the teacher. But the amazing thing is that the teacher he originally went to comes to him, to the new teacher, and is totally humbled because he learns humility in that whole process, which strikes me that's what's going on in the partly a little bit in the Tolstoy story.
The second one, the Archbishop.
That the bishop was open to learning. You would think he'd be pretty narrowed down into what he thought was right and wrong, and yet he wasn't at all.
He wasn't, was he? Even though I played him like a pompous ass at the end. He was just a bishop, and he was a good man. He was a godly man.
so careful. That's why I'll open one of the stories of Tolstoy and I'll read, on into the night, and that happens many, many times because it says, okay, this is what we can do, and here's, human frailty, but we can go forth.
We could be either of those characters.
We could be either of the, and that's what's
the
so.
hermits or the
We could,
bishop or the
Yeah.
captain of the ship. I
Yeah.
mean,
or in the first story, we could be either the generous one at times, or the very strict and follow the rules and be upright and hold.
I shouldn't have hit my boy, though.
I was going to tell you about that.
It didn't do any good. Just made me feel bad.
Well, you're forgiven.
Thank you.
I love some of the ways that you figured things out about the characters, the way Tolstoy wrote, especially you noticed in the first story, Elijah really understood about when to be quiet about something. At first I was surprised when he said, "Oh, that's God's work," or I just lost my money or something. Because I think he had such a real sense of that was part of his service, and that he was part of his faith. He knew that he'd done something, believing in the good and God, I suppose. It's the way he was thinking of it, because he talked about being a servant of God. So he just had that, so he had some little natural qualities that came out of it. Even when he was in the back with the bees, tell the bees could just sit on his beard, and he was, just engaged in under the trees and the sunlight. It was very beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful? Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a great comment. Yes?
I have a question that came up as I was listening to the stories, because I detect a wry tone in Tolstoy's storytelling, which makes me curious to know what were his own religious beliefs. Was he a devout Christian, or did he simply use the faith as a framework for his stories? I don't know enough about it, his life, so I'm asking if anybody else knows.
I know a little bit about that, yes. He was a very devout believer in the love of love, and of the love that every human being, and in fact carried through the whole universe, has this power and the energy within to exude this wonderful, affectionate, joyous love to everyone else. And that's why I like his transforming nonviolence into this more positive, it's just not harming, it's being, overcoming any kind of difficulty and or the suffering of the world and all the tribulations, by just having realized, it's a realization that he had, more than he did not like. Obviously, you can see he did not like the strictures of the church, and he was excommunicated. I can't remember for which one, but I think for his novel *The Resurrection*, because of his very, very strong depiction of the church as not at all adhering to the teachings of Jesus or of any of the other religious people in the world. He also, an interesting thing that I just read again, or found out a couple of years ago, was that he had studied all the major religions of the world, all the Western and Eastern philosophies, could speak many languages as well, spoke and walked and talked with all types of different people, had a really interesting life. But what he did, he compiled a book called Calendar of Wisdom. It's a daily reading of the wise thoughts, and then under each, on each page or each week, he'd have a theme of faith, justice, love, all the different ones you can read about. So that was, it's a much more the inner growth, and how you reach into figuring out how we can, how this can come about, that we can overcome so much of our own ego, or what we think is important in practical events and practical affairs, and get into that. I almost forgot what I was going to say. So we got.
He reached into many of the great religions, and including, I don't know very much about it at all, but I understand he was very much inspired by the teachings and the words of Ramakrishna,
and Vivekananda quite a bit.
And Vivekananda himself, who
He actually wanted to have them published, and had made arrangements for getting the 4 yogas published, but he died before that happened.
Thank you, that answers my question. Thank you.
I just want to say how terrific they were, Bob and Wendy. You can't, I read just, little, some Tolstoy, but always stayed with me was the fact that he was so taken with the gospel of Ramakrishna and the writings of Vivekananda, but also he was such a seeker that it was so apt that he died at a train station, going somewhere.
He was going to a convent to be with his sister.
A pilgrim somewhere.
Yeah, someplace else, to leave it. So that's again, it's how he was such a human being. Oh, well, thank you very much for coming. Any more questions? Yes?
Well, just a quick one,
We
because I'm
have
not
to-
sure, but in answering, I think Tolstoy developed his own Bible.
Yes, he did.
So,
Oh, he.
and so I think he sifted out what he thought was really genuine and inner and spiritual and love, that direct love, from some of the other sayings or.
An amalgamation of the best of all the different faiths.
Yeah, but I think it was a sifting out, but I'm not an expert.
This is a point I wanted to make. And both Gandhi and Tolstoy did not follow their own vision. Gandhi was a student and a believer in the gospel of the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the main teachings of Hindu religion, and what I've learned of from singing in the choir with Krishna Prana. I go to the Vedanta temple. So that's how Gandhi never said that he was a great soul. He wouldn't admit to that. He thought all of us could be great souls, and he didn't want to be adulated, because that's limiting, it's bringing it right down to this stage, instead of thinking this is huge, it's beyond time, space, and cause. And Tolstoy, on the other hand, always had his guide, and his creed was not based on anything he just developed by himself. He believed in the words of Jesus, and to follow those. So that's it's very much, they're very much both into a spiritual trek, rather than just being a great author or a great leader of people. So that's why I like them so much. I hope I made that clear.
We should hear before you leave, though, that, we could just read these stories, but you believed in, a verbal presentation of those. So is there something, why do you think this is a potent way to present those stories?
Because every other way is going to not work. Let's put it that way. It doesn't. There's no way. You've got to have the spirit. And that's why I like his use of the light in the three hermits. Just that light Ooh, that's going to pass through anything. It's going to pass above, beyond, and it's there. It's existence, that light, and the light is the core. You know, the light energy, and the other one, there's no door ever going to be closed off from something in your spirit. You're not going to shut your door on those people if you have a heart like Elisha, are you? And we can't face Putin with anything but this love. You know, there's nothing that's going to transform anybody unless you have realized some of this within. And that's why I like Tolstoy so much, because he makes it possible. You know, you can see it.
It's hard to bring these spiritual ideas, which we
That's the other thing.
into, you know, the real present. Today, you know, I was thinking I have a Ukrainian flag, you know, a printout of it on our refrigerator, and I thought I wanted to bring it here and Scotch tape it to the table. And thinking about, do I want peace right now more than I want the Russians to be pushed out, and what all that entails, the brutality that's being inflicted on them, to have that kind of, you know, godly, you know, equivalency in the world. I suspect that some of the ideas that are in Tolstoy's spiritual realm make it hard to kind of want to those misled Russian soldiers and their misled generals and their misled, you know, president of the company spared from, you know, I mean, I don't know how to even get near bringing those things of nonviolence to this situation up there. I just don't know. It's hard. I don't know how to adapt to it, and I don't want to. That's okay. I just have to realize I accept all of that.
Can I just add something to answer your question? It goes back to the original oral history telling that is ancient.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how people learned, how they told their stories, and how they were passed on to subsequent generations. And hearing it in person by people who are reading it or telling it goes back to that ancient art.
It does, and that's
why it's effective.
and that's what he drew from too. He one famous storyteller in his area had come to stay at his place for a while and told stories to him, and one that we were going to do but didn't have time for was called What Men Live By. And he listened to that carefully. They did have time. They sat around and told stories. And I think that I had the fortune, and Sue too, as teachers, to tell stories to children and to have them write stories and to take the time to say, this is what I feel and this is what I believe and so on. Okay, Tolstoy said that nothing will work because the only thing that will work is that if everybody realizes that they're an individual moral agent. That was what I wrote over and over in my thesis. It's not an institution, it's not the laws, it's not a particular system of political philosophy. It's everyone acting as an individual moral agent. And I looked up agent because it's not a Hollywood thing. It's the agent in the sense that it's yourself, ourselves are agents of change. We act out either for a positive or for a negative good. And another thing about nonviolence is you don't think about your what's going to happen. You noticed in the stories there wasn't going to be. Well, I don't know if Ephraim was going to change his life or not. You know, Tolstoy always ends with this. Well, you know, their life's going to go on and may or may not. But it's his point always is that it's up to the individual to see act with as much power, and not just that, but to Gandhi and Tolstoy both had this their religion and their what they were going to follow had to be a part of everybody that was, especially Gandhi, everybody that was following him. Nobody. You had to have the disciplines. You had to discipline yourself to be as free of ego, free of any thought of reward, free of power, free of all that stuff, and just do what you're going to do. Just like that chef over in Ukraine that cooks for many, many meals, got bombed out. Okay, we're moving. We got to get over here. So there's people like that all over. Even in the concentration camps, there's always somebody that's going to shine and bring forth what they can out of a totally insufferable condition. Okay.
Yeah. Everybody.
Can we just have about 3 more minutes here before you?
Sure, I'm
Could
just
we
stretching
have
my legs.
the door open or
Let's get a
something?
little-
Especially for us, we're sitting under these lights. It's so hot.
Did you people know that Annie over there is Bobby's wife?
We just wanted to finish before you guys go, and,
No, we're not going.
the president wants to give you a vote of thanks, so before you pop out, is that okay?
Sure.
Folks, I thought we had a wonderful experience,
We can sit down.
and I feel like there was so much wisdom that was shared, and Carolyn Dorrance, our president, will give the vote of thanks in just a second, but first I just want to let you know what our next events are. So if you're interested in a Tuesday night study circle, at this Tuesday, May 10th at 7:30, there will be a topic, Quail Springs Permaculture Values, and the people from there who do the work will be on Zoom, or you can come into our seminar room to discuss that. And then the next Saturday event will be on May 21st, 2 to 4, and it will be in this hall. And Srinivas Chari will speak on meditations on yoga. That should be interesting. And also we do exist on volunteer donations, so if anyone would at any point like to either put something in the box, mail it in, or go to the website, we have a link for that. And right now I'd like to hand it over for the most important part of this ending part from us to Carolyn Dorrance, and she will give the vote of thanks.
This has certainly been a super experience, and as I said earlier, engaging. It was noted earlier that all of our programs are rooted in the aims in the Declaration of Interdependence, and we just would like to read number 3, to honor through appropriate observance the contributions of men and women of all ages to world culture. In other words, we do want to recognize the many contributors to world culture over hundreds of years. And so it certainly is a privilege to actually experience so directly the presentations by Bob Lesner and Wendy Varnals, and all the work that Marcia Warrecker has in doing this. And we know that there's some other contributors that we're totally appreciative of their effort and of their inspiring us, because it's, as just mentioned, it's not enough just to read or try to memorize good principles of world culture, but it's to bring something so alive as they have done and to inspire us. And certainly we need to look to find examples of spokespeople for world culture and all the ideas that we've heard today. Notice how practical the way the stories are told, and that means that our speakers have actually worked on absorbing and going into, and as I pointed out, invited us to let our hearts give life and inspiration to these, not just these aims, but to truly want to help all of humanity and coming together and bringing so much improvement and guidance. So we hope you come again. I think we could use a lot more stories. Yeah, Rajaprana and Krishna Prana from the Vedanta temple. They certainly were workers giving strength and life to these stories that we've heard today. So thank you very much for coming. And
Thank you, too.
and if you need a little help in concentration and all, we do invite you 2 weeks from today to hear a program on meditation and yoga. Okay. And always check our website. Okay.
Thanks, Bobby. That was great.
Thanks, Keith.
Great to spend a little time.
Oh, yeah, they're fantastic.
Wonderful. I gotta say, Carolyn. Hi, good job. It's been a long time. Well, I keep thinking about May 11th and the dinner that we're not having. Oh, Nonviolence and Magnanimity.